The night was cold, and Maya had exactly $12 left in her wallet. She counted the money twice, hoping somehow the number would change. It didn't. $12 had to last her until Friday, and it was only Monday. She sat on the edge of her tiny bed in her studio apartment. The place was so small that if she stretched her arms out, she could almost touch both walls. The paint was peeling near the window, and there was a water stain on the ceiling that seemed to grow bigger every time it rained. But it was all she could afford, and even that was becoming harder each month. Maya was 22 years old, and life had not been kind to her. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her emails. 3 job rejections this week alone. 1 from a coffee shop. 1 from a bookstore. 1 from a small office that needed someone to answer phones. She had worn her only good dress to all 3 interviews. She had smiled. She had been polite. She had done everything right, but it was never enough. The truth was, Maya didn't have a college degree. She didn't have connections. She didn't have a family name that opened doors. What she had was a high school diploma, a lot of determination, and a past that she tried very hard not to think about. Her phone buzzed. It was a reminder that her rent was due in 6 days. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Panicking wouldn't help. It never did. To make ends meet, Maya worked as a cleaner at night. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid cash. And the company didn't ask too many questions. Every evening, she would take the bus downtown and spend hours mopping floors, wiping windows, and emptying trash cans in fancy buildings where people in expensive suits walked past her like she was invisible. She didn't mind being invisible. In fact, sometimes she preferred it. When you're invisible, nobody expects anything from you. Nobody looks at you with pity or judgment. You just exist in the background, doing your job, going home, and trying to survive another day. That night, Maya put on her worn sneakers and her old jacket and headed to work. The bus was crowded, full of tired people heading home after long days. She found a seat near the back and stared out the window as the city lights blurred past. Her assignment for the night was the Hartwell Hotel. It was one of the fanciest buildings in the city. The kind of place where celebrities stayed and business deals worth millions were made over lunch. Maya had cleaned there a few times before, always after hours when the guests were asleep and the lobby was quiet. She arrived at the service entrance around 9 o'clock. Her supervisor, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Park, handed her a list of tasks. Main lobby, conference room B, and the second-floor hallway. Mrs. Park said without looking up. There's some event happening tomorrow night, so they want everything perfect. Don't touch anything in the ballroom. That's off limits. Maya nodded and got to work. The main lobby of the Hartwell Hotel was something out of a movie. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The floors were made of marble so shiny that Maya could see her own reflection. There were fresh flowers everywhere, and the furniture looked like it cost more than everything she had ever owned combined. She moved quietly, mopping the floors and wiping down the surfaces. A few hotel staff members walked past her without a second glance. That was fine. She was used to it. Around 11 o'clock, Maya finished the conference room and headed toward the second-floor hallway. On her way, she passed by the entrance to the grand ballroom. The doors were slightly open, and she couldn't help but peek inside. What she saw took her breath away. The ballroom was enormous. Dozens of round tables were being set up with white tablecloths and golden centerpieces. A stage had been built at one end, with microphones and speakers ready for some kind of performance. And in the corner, near a wall of windows overlooking the city, sat a grand piano. It was beautiful, black and sleek, with keys that seemed to glow under the soft lights. Maya felt something stir inside her chest, something she had buried a long time ago. She quickly looked away and continued walking. The ballroom was off limits. She had work to do. But as she cleaned the hallway, her mind kept drifting back to that piano. She thought about her mother, and the memories came flooding in, whether she wanted them or not. Her mother had been a piano teacher. Not a famous one, or a rich one. Just a woman who gave lessons to neighborhood kids for a few dollars an hour. They had lived in a small apartment with thin walls and noisy neighbors, But in that apartment, there had been an old upright piano that her mother treasured more than anything else in the world. Maya had learned to play on that piano. She would sit beside her mother for hours, learning scales and chords, and eventually full pieces. Her mother always said she had a gift, that her fingers understood the music in a way that couldn't be taught. You play with your heart, her mother used to say. That's something special, don't ever lose that. But then her mother got sick. The treatments were expensive, and the bills piled up faster than they could pay. They sold the piano first, then the furniture, then everything else they could spare. It wasn't enough. Her mother passed away when Maya was 17. After that, Maya had to drop out of school to work. She bounced between jobs, trying to stay afloat. The music inside her went quiet. There was no room for dreams when you were just trying to survive. Now, 5 years later, she hadn't touched a piano since the day they sold their old one. Maya finished cleaning the hallway and headed back downstairs. She was about to leave through the service entrance when she noticed something on one of the marble tables in the lobby. It was an envelope, golden and elegant, with fancy writing on the front. She looked around. The lobby was empty. Whoever had left it must have dropped it by accident. Maya picked it up, intending to bring it to the front desk. But then she saw what was inside. It was an invitation to the Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala. The event was happening tomorrow night. According to the invitation, it was an exclusive gathering of the city's most influential people, business leaders, celebrities, millionaires. The kind of people Maya cleaned up after but would never actually meet. She should have turned it in. That was the right thing to do. But something made her hesitate. Maya thought about her empty apartment, her $12, her stack of rejection emails. She thought about how she had been invisible her whole life, always on the outside looking in at a world that didn't want her. What would it feel like, just for one night, to be on the inside? It was a crazy thought. She didn't have a fancy dress. She didn't have jewelry. She didn't have any business being at a gala full of rich people. If anyone found out she had snuck in, she would lose her job and probably get arrested. But the invitation felt heavy in her hands, like it was meant for her. Like the universe was offering her something. And all she had to do was be brave enough to take it. Maya slipped the invitation into her pocket. She told herself she would think about it, that she probably wouldn't go, that it was too risky, and too foolish, and too impossible. But deep down, she already knew. She was going to that gala, and she had no idea that this one decision would change her life forever. Maya spent the entire next day convincing herself not to go. She told herself it was a bad idea at least 50 times. She paced around her tiny apartment, looking at that golden invitation on her kitchen counter like it was a ticking bomb. What was she thinking? She couldn't walk into a room full of millionaires. She would be caught immediately. Someone would ask for her name, check a list, and realize she didn't belong. Security would escort her out. She might even end up in trouble with the police. And for what? One night of pretending to be someone she wasn't? But then she looked around her apartment. The peeling paint, the water stain, the empty fridge. She thought about her stack of rejection emails and her $12 that had now become $8 after she bought bread and peanut butter for the week. What did she really have to lose? By 6 o'clock in the evening, Maya had made up her mind. She was going. The first problem was obvious. She had nothing to wear. Her only nice dress was the black one she wore to job interviews. It was simple, plain, and clearly not designer. But it was all she had. She ironed it carefully, trying to make it look as elegant as possible. The fabric was a little faded, and there was a small stitch near the hem, where she had repaired a tear last year. But in dim lighting, maybe nobody would notice. The second problem was her face. Maya rarely wore makeup. She couldn't afford it, and she never had anywhere fancy to go anyway. But tonight was different. Tonight, she needed to blend in. She knocked on her neighbor's door. Mrs. Liu was a kind woman in her 70s, who had lived in the building for decades. She always smiled at Maya in the hallway, and sometimes left homemade dumplings outside her door. "I have a job interview," Maya lied, feeling guilty immediately. "A really important one." Do you have any makeup I could borrow? Mrs. Liu's face lit up. She disappeared into her apartment and came back with a small bag full of lipstick, powder, and eyeshadow. Most of it was old, probably from years ago, but it was better than nothing. You will do great, Mrs. Liu said, patting Maya's hand. You are a good girl. They would be lucky to have you. Maya thanked her and went back to her apartment with a knot in her stomach. She spent the next 2 hours getting ready. She watched makeup tutorials on her phone, pausing and rewinding as she tried to copy what the women on the screen were doing. Her hands were shaky, and she messed up her eyeliner 3 times before getting it right. For her hair, she didn't have curling irons or fancy products. So she braided it while it was damp and let it dry. When she undid the braids, her hair fell in soft waves that actually looked pretty good. Her mother used to style her hair the same way when she was little, before piano recitals at the community center. The memory made her chest ache. By 8 o'clock, Maya was ready. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror above her sink. She didn't look like a millionaire. She didn't look like she belonged at a fancy gala. But she looked like the best version of herself. And that would have to be enough. She grabbed the golden invitation, put it in her small black purse, and walked out the door before she could change her mind. The bus ride downtown felt longer than usual. Maya sat in the back, clutching her purse and trying to calm her racing heart. People around her were going about their normal evenings. They had no idea that the girl in the simple black dress was about to do something completely crazy. When Maya arrived at the Hartwell Hotel, her legs felt like they might give out. The entrance was transformed. Red carpet stretched from the curb to the golden doors. Photographers lined both sides, their cameras flashing as guests arrived in limousines and luxury cars. Women in glittering gowns stepped out like movie stars, their diamonds catching the light. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos offered their arms and smiled for the cameras. Maya had walked through the service entrance of this building dozens of times. But she had never seen it like this. It was like stepping into another world. She took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. A man in a suit stood at the door, checking invitations. Maya's hands trembled as she handed him the golden envelope. He glanced at it, then glanced at her. For one terrifying moment, she thought he was going to call security. But then he nodded and stepped aside. Enjoy your evening, miss. Maya walked through the doors and into the grand lobby. If she thought the hotel was impressive during her cleaning shifts, it was nothing compared to tonight. The chandeliers seemed brighter. The flowers seemed more beautiful. Everything sparkled and shimmered like something from a fairy tale. And the people. There were so many people. Women dripping in jewels, their gowns flowing behind them like colored rivers. Men with expensive watches and confident smiles. Everyone seemed to know each other. They kissed cheeks and shook hands and laughed at inside jokes that Maya would never understand. She felt like an alien who had landed on the wrong planet. Maya walked slowly through the crowd, trying to look like she belonged. But she could feel the stares. Not obvious ones, but quick glances, eyes that looked her up and down and immediately knew she was different. A woman in a red silk gown whispered something to her friend as Maya passed. They both giggled behind their champagne glasses. Maya's face burned. She kept walking. She found a quiet corner near a pillar and tried to disappear. A waiter passed by with a tray of drinks, and she took one just to have something to hold. She didn't even know what it was. Something bubbly and golden that probably cost more than her weekly groceries. From her corner, Maya watched the room. She watched the easy confidence of people who had never worried about rent or job rejections or counting their last few dollars. She watched them laugh and talk and move through life like the world was made for them. And maybe it was. Maybe this world was made for people like them, and people like Maya were just supposed to clean up after they left. She was starting to think this was a mistake when a man approached her. He was tall, probably in his 40s, with gray hair at his temples and a suit that looked like it cost more than her entire apartment. He had the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile, it was more like a smirk. "I don't think I've seen you before," he said, looking her up and down. "Are you with the catering company? Or maybe, coat check?" Maya felt like she had been slapped. "I'm a guest," she said quietly. The man raised an eyebrow. He didn't believe her. That was obvious. "Really? And which family are you with?" I know everyone here. Maya's mind went blank. She didn't have an answer. She didn't have a family name to drop or a company to mention. She was just a girl who cleaned offices and found an invitation on a marble table. The man's smirk grew wider. That's what I thought. He turned and walked away, leaving Maya standing there with her face burning and her heart pounding. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run out the door and never look back. Coming here was the stupidest thing she had ever done. Who was she kidding? She didn't belong here. She would never belong here. Maya set down her untouched drink and started walking toward the exit. But then something caught her eye. Through the crowd, across the ballroom, she saw it. The grand piano. The same one she had seen last night through the open doors. It sat in the corner near the tall windows, black and beautiful and completely untouched. Nobody was playing it. Nobody was even standing near it. It was just there, waiting. Maya stopped walking. She stared at that piano, and suddenly she wasn't in a ballroom full of strangers anymore. She was in her mother's tiny apartment, sitting on a wooden bench, learning her first scales. She could almost hear her mother's voice. You play with your heart. That's something special. Don't ever lose that. Maya had lost it. She had buried it along with her mother 5 years ago. She had told herself that music was a luxury she couldn't afford, that dreams were for people with money and connections and fancy last names. But standing there, looking at that piano, something woke up inside her. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. Maya didn't walk toward the exit. She walked toward the piano. Maya's feet moved before her brain could stop them. She walked through the crowd like she was in a trance, her eyes fixed on that black grand piano in the corner of the ballroom. People stepped aside as she passed, probably wondering where this strange girl in the plain black dress was going. She didn't care anymore. Something had taken over. Something stronger than fear, or embarrassment, or common sense. The piano seemed to get bigger as she got closer. It was a Steinway, she realized. One of the best pianos in the world. Her mother used to show her pictures of Steinways in old music magazines. She would point at them and say, "Someday, Maya, someday you'll play one of these." Someday had never come. Until now. Maya reached the piano and stood there for a moment, just looking at it. The keys were perfect. White and black, stretching out like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. She ran her fingers lightly across the surface, not pressing down, just feeling. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she had played. What if she had forgotten everything? What if her fingers didn't remember? What if she sat down and made a fool of herself in front of all these wealthy, important people? But then she thought about the man who had asked if she was with coat check. She thought about the women who had giggled behind their champagne glasses. She thought about every person in this room who had looked at her and seen nothing. Just a poor girl who didn't belong. Maybe they were right. Maybe she didn't belong here, but she belonged at this piano. That much she knew. Maya sat down on the bench. The leather was cool and smooth beneath her. She adjusted her position, finding the right distance from the keys, the way her mother had taught her so many years ago. The ballroom was noisy. People were talking and laughing, glasses clinking, music playing softly from speakers somewhere. Nobody was paying attention to the girl at the piano. She was invisible again, just like always. Good, Maya thought. Maybe that was better. Maybe she could just play for herself, quietly, and then slip away before anyone noticed. She placed her hands on the keys, and then she began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, like she was asking the piano a question and waiting for an answer. Her fingers felt stiff at first, unsure of themselves after so many years of silence. But then something clicked. It was like riding a bicycle, people always said. You never really forget. And Maya realized in that moment that it was true. Her fingers remembered. Her hands remembered. Her heart remembered. She started playing Chopin. Ballade, no, 1-inch G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the classical piano repertoire. And it had been her mother's favorite. They used to listen to recordings of it together on Sunday mornings, her mother closing her eyes and swaying gently to the music. This piece tells a story. Her mother had explained once. It starts with longing, then struggle, then beauty, then triumph. It's like life itself. Maya had spent 2 years learning this piece when she was 15. She had practiced it until her fingers ached, until the notes were burned into her memory. She had been planning to play it at a competition the year her mother got sick. She never got to perform it. Not once. Until tonight. The music swelled. Maya's fingers danced across the keys, faster now, more confident. The melody rose and fell like waves on an ocean, sometimes gentle, sometimes crashing. She forgot where she was. She forgot about the fancy dresses and the expensive champagne and the people who had looked down on her. She was back in her mother's apartment. She was sitting at the old upright piano with the sticky keys and the chipped wood. Her mother was beside her, nodding along, smiling that warm smile that Maya missed so much it physically hurt. "Play with your heart," her mother's voice whispered in her memory. "That's something special." Maya played with everything she had. Somewhere in the middle of the piece, she became aware of something strange. The room had gone quiet. The conversations had stopped. The clinking glasses had fallen silent. She didn't dare look up. She kept her eyes on the keys, kept her fingers moving, kept pouring her soul into the music. But she could feel it. The attention. The weight of hundreds of eyes turning toward her. The piece built toward its climax. This was the hardest part. The section that had taken her months to master. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, hitting notes so fast they blurred together into something almost impossible. The music was thundering now, filling every corner of the massive ballroom. Maya thought about her mother dying in that hospital bed. She thought about selling the piano to pay for a funeral. She thought about 5 years of silence, 5 years of struggling, 5 years of being invisible. And she put all of it into the music. The final notes rang out, powerful and haunting. Maya held them, letting them echo through the room, letting them fade slowly into silence. Then, she lifted her hands from the keys. For a moment, there was nothing. Complete silence. Maya sat frozen on the bench, suddenly terrified. Had she made a mistake? Had she embarrassed herself? Were people staring at her in confusion, wondering why the coat check girl was banging on their piano? Then someone started clapping. It was just one person at first, then another, and then the entire ballroom erupted in applause. Maya finally looked up, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. People were standing. Not just a few people, everyone. Hundreds of men and women in their expensive gowns and tailored suits were on their feet, clapping and cheering. Some of them were wiping their eyes. Others were just staring at her with their mouths open, like they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The woman in the red silk gown who had giggled at her earlier was standing near the front, tears streaming down her cheeks. The man who had asked if she was coat check was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in embarrassment somewhere. Maya didn't know what to do. She had never experienced anything like this. She sat there on the piano bench, overwhelmed, her hands trembling in her lap. A woman approached her. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes. She wore a simple but elegant blue dress and a string of pearls around her neck. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "Who are you? Where did you come from?" Maya opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. What was she supposed to say? That she was a cleaner? That she had snuck in with a stolen invitation? That she hadn't touched a piano in 5 years because she couldn't afford to keep the one her mother left her? Before she could figure out what to say, someone else approached. A man this time. He was older, with white hair and a face that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. He walked with the confidence of someone who was used to being in charge. Maya recognized him. Not personally, of course, but she had seen his face on the wall of the hotel lobby, on plaques and photographs and dedication signs. This was Richard Hartwell, the billionaire, the founder of the Hartwell Foundation, the man whose name was on the building she cleaned every week. He stopped in front of her, and for a long moment, he just looked at her. His expression was unreadable. Then he spoke. "Young lady," he said slowly, "I have spent 40 years supporting musicians around the world. I have heard performances in Vienna, in Paris, in New York. I have listened to graduates from the finest conservatories on the planet." He paused, and Maya held her breath. "But I have never," he continued, his voice cracking slightly, "heard anyone play with that much soul." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back, trying to hold herself together. "Where did you study?" Richard Hartwell asked. And with those 4 words, Maya knew that everything was about to change. Maya looked up at Richard Hartwell, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat felt tight. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This man, this billionaire whose name was on buildings and scholarships and charity foundations, was standing in front of her asking where she had studied music. The truth was embarrassing. The truth would expose her. The truth would reveal that she was nobody. That she had snuck into this gala with a stolen invitation. That she had no business being in this room with these people. But Maya was tired of hiding. She was tired of being invisible. And something about the way Richard Hartwell was looking at her made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could tell the truth. "I didn't study anywhere," she said quietly. The people around her exchanged confused glances. Richard Hartwell tilted his head slightly, waiting for her to continue. "My mother taught me," Maya went on, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was a piano teacher. Not a famous one. She just gave lessons to kids in our neighborhood for a few dollars an hour. We had an old upright piano in our apartment. I learned everything on that piano." She paused, swallowing hard. The memories were rushing back, and it was taking everything she had not to break down. She died 5 years ago. We had to sell the piano to help pay for her funeral. I haven't played since then. Not until tonight. The ballroom was silent. Maya could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but she kept her gaze fixed on the floor. She couldn't bear to see their reactions. The pity, the judgment, the realization that she didn't belong here. Richard Hartwell was quiet for a long moment. When Maya finally looked up, she expected to see disappointment on his face. Or maybe polite disinterest, the kind of expression rich people wore when they encountered someone from a different world. But that's not what she saw. Richard Hartwell's eyes were glistening. He was blinking rapidly, like he was trying to hold back tears. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Maya." "Maya Chen." He nodded slowly, like he was memorizing it. Then he turned to the crowd that had gathered around the piano. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "I have been fortunate enough to meet many talented musicians in my life. I have donated to music programs on 4 continents. I have sat on the boards of conservatories and symphony orchestras. I have heard prodigies who started training at age 3 with the best teachers money could buy." He paused and looked back at Maya. "But what I heard tonight was something different. This young woman taught herself to play on an old piano in a small apartment. She lost her mother. She lost her instrument. She has had every reason to give up. And yet she just performed one of the most difficult pieces in classical music, like it was written for her." Maya felt her cheeks burning. She wanted to disappear into the floor. She wasn't used to being talked about like this. She wasn't used to being seen at all. Richard Hartwell reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. He handed it to Maya. "The Hartwell Foundation funds full scholarships to the Manhattan Conservatory of Music," he said. "Room, board, tuition, everything. We select 2 students each year from around the world, students who show exceptional promise." Maya stared at the card in her hand. It had his name on it, his phone number, the foundation's address. "I want you to audition," Richard Hartwell continued. "And I want you to know that as far as I'm concerned, you've already passed." Maya's hands were shaking. She couldn't process what was happening. 10 minutes ago, she was about to leave in humiliation. 10 minutes ago, she was the girl that people laughed at and mistook for staff. Now, one of the richest men in the country was offering her a scholarship to one of the best music schools in the world. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me? You don't even know me." Richard Hartwell smiled. It wasn't the smirk of the man who had asked about coat check. It was a real smile, warm and genuine. "Can I tell you something, Maya?" he asked. She nodded. 50 years ago, I was a kid from a poor family in a small town nobody has ever heard of. My father worked in a factory. My mother cleaned houses. We didn't have much, but we had a radio, and every Sunday night, my mother would tune it to the classical music station. She loved piano music more than anything. He paused, his eyes distant, lost in memory. She always dreamed of hearing me play. But we couldn't afford lessons. We couldn't afford a piano. We couldn't afford any of it. She died when I was 19, before I made my first dollar, before I could give her anything she dreamed of. Maya felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't bother wiping them away. I built my fortune in business, Richard Hartwell continued, but I've spent the last 40 years trying to make sure that kids like me, kids like you, don't have to give up on their dreams because of money, because talent doesn't care about your bank account. And neither do I. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Your mother taught you well, Maya. She gave you something that no conservatory could ever teach. She gave you heart. And that's the one thing money can't buy. Maya broke down. She couldn't hold it together anymore. The tears came flooding out, 5 years of grief and struggle and loneliness pouring out of her in front of a room full of strangers. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. She felt arms around her. The woman in the blue dress with the silver hair was hugging her, holding her like a grandmother would hold a grandchild. It's okay, sweetheart, the woman murmured. It's okay. Let it out. Other people gathered around. Not to judge, not to stare, but to offer support. Someone handed her a tissue. Someone else brought her a glass of water. These people who had seemed so cold and distant just an hour ago were now looking at her with kindness and respect. Maya wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. She looked at Richard Hartwell, who was still standing there, patient and understanding. I don't know what to say, she managed. Say you'll come to the audition, he replied. Maya looked at the card in her hand. She thought about her tiny apartment with the peeling paint. She thought about her $8 and her stack of rejection emails. She thought about the life she had been living, just surviving, day after day, with no hope of anything ever changing. And then she thought about her mother. She thought about Sunday mornings listening to Chopin. She thought about hours of practice on that old upright piano. She thought about a dream she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed. I'll be there, Maya said. Richard Hartwell nodded. I know you will. The rest of the night was a blur. People kept coming up to Maya, introducing themselves, shaking her hand, telling her how moved they were by her performance. Business cards were pressed into her palm, invitations to dinners and events and private concerts. People who had ignored her an hour ago now wanted to know her story. But through all of it, Maya kept thinking about one thing: her mother. She wished more than anything that her mother could have been there. That she could have seen Maya play on a grand Steinway piano in a room full of millionaires. That she could have heard the applause. That she could have met Richard Hartwell and heard him talk about talent and heart and dreams. But maybe, Maya thought, maybe she was there. Maybe she had been there all along, guiding her fingers across the keys, giving her the courage to sit down at that piano when every part of her wanted to run away. As Maya left the gala that night, she stopped at the door and looked back at the ballroom one last time. The chandeliers were still glittering. The people were still talking and laughing. The grand piano sat in the corner, silent now, waiting for its next player. Maya smiled through her tears. Thank you, Mom, she whispered. Then she walked out into the cold night air, the business card clutched tightly in her hand, ready to begin a new chapter of her life. 3 years later, Maya stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, and she still couldn't believe this was her life. The auditorium was filled with over 2,000 people. She had peeked through the curtain a few minutes ago and seen the rows of red velvet seats stretching back into the darkness. Critics from major newspapers were in the audience. Music professors, record label executives, people who had traveled from other countries just to hear her play. Her name was on the marquee outside. Maya Chen, solo piano performance, sold out. It felt like a dream. Sometimes she still expected to wake up in her tiny studio apartment with the peeling paint, counting her last few dollars and wondering how she would make it through the week. But this wasn't a dream, this was real. And in 10 minutes, she would walk onto the most famous concert stage in the world. A lot had changed since that night at the Hartwell Gala. Maya had auditioned for the Manhattan Conservatory 2 weeks after the gala, and just as Richard Hartwell had predicted, she was accepted immediately. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, housing, meals, even a small allowance for books and supplies. For the first time in years, Maya didn't have to worry about money. She could focus entirely on music. The first few months were hard. Maya was surrounded by students who had been training since childhood, who had attended elite music academies, who could sight-read pieces that took her weeks to learn. She felt like an outsider all over again, the girl who didn't belong. But she worked harder than anyone else. She practiced 6 hours a day, sometimes more. She stayed late in the practice rooms, while other students went to parties. She studied theory and history and technique until her brain ached and her fingers were sore. And slowly, things began to change. Her professors noticed her dedication. Her classmates began to respect her. By the end of her first year, she was no longer the girl who had snuck into a gala. She was one of the most promising students the conservatory had seen in years. Richard Hartwell checked in on her regularly. He came to her recitals. He introduced her to people in the music industry. He became something like a mentor to her. And sometimes, something like family. He never made her feel like she owed him anything. He just believed in her, the same way her mother had believed in her all those years ago. In her second year, Maya won a national piano competition. In her third year, she was invited to perform with a symphony orchestra. Articles were written about her. Interviews were requested. People started calling her a rising star. And now here she was, Carnegie Hall, the place where legends had performed, the place her mother used to talk about like it was a magical kingdom far, far away. A stagehand approached her. 5 minutes. Miss Chen. Maya nodded and took a deep breath. She looked down at her hands. The same hands that had scrubbed floors and wiped windows and counted coins on a kitchen table. The same hands that had learned to play on an old upright piano in a tiny apartment. She was wearing a beautiful black gown tonight, not the faded dress she had worn to the gala 3 years ago. This one was designed specifically for her. Fitted perfectly. Elegant without being flashy. But she had asked the designer to add one small detail that nobody else would notice. A tiny embroidered flower near her heart. A white lily. Her mother's favorite. Maya closed her eyes and whispered the same thing she whispered before every performance. "This is for you, Mom." The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The crowd fell silent. Maya walked onto the stage. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. 2,000 people clapping. Some of them rising to their feet before she had even played a single note. She smiled and bowed gracefully, then made her way to the grand piano at the center of the stage. It was a Steinway. Just like the one at the Hartwell Gala. Just like the one in her dreams. Maya sat down and adjusted the bench. She placed her hands on the keys and let the silence settle around her. Then she began to play. She had chosen Chopin's Ballade, No One. The same piece she had played that night, 3 years ago. The piece her mother had loved more than any other. It felt right to play it here, on this stage, in front of all these people. But it was different now. 3 years of training had sharpened her technique. She could play passages that used to trip her up without even thinking. The music flowed through her like water. Smooth and effortless. And yet the heart was still there. The emotion. The connection to her mother that had made people cry at the gala. That was something no conservatory could teach. That was something she had carried inside her all along. The piece built and swelled and crashed and whispered. Maya played through memories of her childhood. Through grief and loss and struggle. Through the night she had walked into a room full of millionaires, with nothing but a stolen invitation and a dream. When she played the final notes, she held them until the echo faded into silence. Then the audience erupted. People were on their feet. The applause was thunderous. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were shouting her name. Maya stood and bowed. her own eyes glistening, her heart so full she thought it might burst. She looked out at the audience and spotted a familiar face in the front row. Richard Hartwell. He was standing and clapping, a proud smile on his face. Beside him was Mrs. Liu, the elderly neighbor who had lent Maya makeup on the night of the gala. Maya had flown her out for the concert and given her the best seat in the house. Backstage after the performance, Maya was surrounded by well-wishers, critics who wanted to interview her, record executives who wanted to sign her, musicians who wanted to collaborate with her. But Maya's mind was already somewhere else. A year earlier, she had started a foundation. The Chen Foundation. It was small at first, just a handful of programs in a few cities. But Richard Hartwell had helped her expand it, and now it operated in 12 cities across the country. The mission was simple: free piano lessons for children who couldn't afford them, instruments donated to families who had none, scholarships for talented young musicians from low-income backgrounds. Everything Maya had wished for when she was young, she was now giving to others. Every month, Maya visited schools and community centers. She sat down with kids who reminded her of herself, kids with worn-out clothes and big dreams, kids who thought the world of music was closed to them because they didn't have money or connections. She told them her story. She showed them that talent could come from anywhere. And then she sat down at whatever piano was available and played for them. "Your circumstances are not your destiny," she would tell them. "I know because I lived it. If I can do this, so can you." Some of those kids would go on to become musicians. Some wouldn't. But all of them would remember the night a woman named Maya Chen came to their neighborhood and showed them what was possible. Reporters loved to ask about the night at the Hartwell Gala. The night a girl with nothing walked into a room full of millionaires and changed her life forever. It had become the stuff of legend, the story that people shared online and talked about at dinner parties. Maya always answered the same way. "People say I walked in with nothing that night. But that's not true. I walked in with everything my mother gave me. The music, the love, the belief that I was worth something even when the world didn't see it. I just needed one moment to show it." She would pause, and then she would smile. We all have that moment waiting for us somewhere. The question is whether we're brave enough to take it. Maya Chen was brave enough. And that made all the difference.